All right, welcome everybody to this week's Pluralia Dialogos. I'm very happy to be joined by Martin Sieff once again, and soon we will be joined as well by Arnaud Develay if all goes well. There might be some technical issues, but Marty, how are you doing today, good sir?
Weather is cold, political temperature is even colder, but otherwise I'm fine, Matt.
Yeah, I figured you'd say something like that. And I mean, we're entering 2026. I was anticipating doing something a little bit different with this first episode of Pluralia Dialogos of the new year. But of course, as is often the case, reality is, will force itself upon these kinds of conversations and change the course of the trajectory of our discussion a little bit, as has happened when yesterday, as we all know, everybody watching, I'm sure, has been thinking about this quite a bit. The entire air defense system in Venezuela, which was reputed to be amongst the better air defense systems of I guess, the Western world, completely failed. It was not engaged even once, despite the whatever it was, 30 or so explosions. The 9 Apache helicopters came in, sweeping down in the middle of the night and whisked away President Maduro and his wife. Now we've got some ramifications. There's a lot of speculation about what went on before that, during that operation. Were there people who were paid off from the inside? Seems so. Were there negotiations between the Chinese, the Russians? Like, these are all questions I don't know the answer to. I don't know what. So what's your take right now, Marty? Where do you see was driving this whole process?
Well, first of all, Matt, I fully agree with your very succinct assessment of it. And I also agree with your very wise caution that we're too near the events. We're so limited in the information we have on them. We have to be cautious. Napoleon said the worst thing you can do on a battlefield is to draw pictures in advance, to imagine the crisis or conflict is going exactly the way you imagine it will go, or that you think it will go. We don't have the information. But having said that, lots of indicators are there. First of all, this is outrageous. And I'm not an admirer of President Maduro or of his policies. But even as a fig leaf, international law needs to count for something, or people need to imagine it counts for something. Otherwise, we are back in 1939, 1940, the law of the jungle. Absolute war could break out between anybody at any time for any reason. And this is outright aggression. There's no question about that. And naked aggression. We didn't even bother pretending to go through the United Nations the way we did when we toppled Saddam Hussein. And President Maduro, I think, has stolen elections outrageously. There were lots of people who fled the country from him. There are many people who will be happy he's gone. But he's not a Saddam Hussein. He's not a Hafiz Assad. He's not a monster that way. There is a lot of things you can criticize him on. But doing this again is the law of the jungle. It's just force makes good. And if we do it to others, how could we complain if others do it to us? This is a very frightening development. You raise another crucial point, though. Up to now, Russia and China have been very quiet on this. Question, why? There are several possibilities, and we don't know the answers. The most optimistic one, if you can call it that, is that however bad the Venezuela situation gets, it will not escalate international tensions because Trump has made a rough and ready deal with President Putin in Moscow and President Xi in Beijing. You give me the Western Hemisphere, and we will effectively pull back from Ukraine, leave the Europeans to stew in their own juice. This is feasible in terms of the talks that have been held between the United States and Russia. It's feasible, but we don't know if such an understanding has been reached, or even if the Americans think it has. President Trump thinks it has been reached, but the Russians and Chinese do not agree with this. They have been very quiet so far. This could mean that a tacit deal has been made. We'll have to wait and see. It could, but there's another even more sinister and terrifying possibility, which is Beijing and Moscow are appalled by this, and this is just going to push them, the Russians especially, closer to the brink of a full-scale reaction and response against Ukraine, against Western Europe, and possibly against the North America, the continental United States, which, as far as they are concerned, of course, strategically includes Canada as well. So this could be bringing us close to a thermonuclear world war. It really could, but we don't. We don't know. Again, I want to sit and hear what your assessment and Arnaud's assessment on this. As the Bible says, we see through a glass darkly, very darkly. And the darkness has just compounded enormously in the past 2 or 3 days. And again, the blatantness of it, swooping in, scooping up the president of a major nation in South America. Even at the worst, even when we toppled President Pinochet in Chile and unleashed an era of darkness and mass murder and repression in Chile.
Oh, you mean we toppled Allende?
Allende, yes.
Yeah.
Forgive me, yes. And Pinochet again. Thank you very much. My ancient memory crossing wires again. I needed your back on that one, exactly. But when Nixon did that, with the enthusiastic support of Henry Kissinger, even then they had more of a fig leaf than we have here. To just scoop a guy up, and according to some reports, which I'm sure you've seen too, of all places, he's in New York City. Will Mayor Mamdani try and get him released, or at least try and use his influence to make sure that he isn't eliminated, or that he gets his due rights in American courts? I don't think he'd be allowed to. But we're in a surrealistic situation here. Even at our most imperialistic and ridiculous under George W. Bush, and I go back, of course, all the way to the Reagan era, but we have never, even when we knocked out Iraq or swept into Afghanistan and inflicted close to 1 million deaths and casualties in deliberately inflicting and maintaining the civil war in Syria, or when Biden did the most monstrous thing of all, 2 million Ukrainians dead so far. We have never been as openly blatant as we are now. The one thing you can say about the president is he's not being a hypocrite. They're being frighteningly open about it. And it is in one key sense, I will stress, consistent with his strategy. That doesn't mean one should justify it or that it's a wise thing to do. I think it's an incredibly stupid, dangerous thing to do. They may get away with it, but more likely they will not. More likely they will not. Will this encourage the dissidents in Iran? Maybe it will, but more likely it will encourage the authorities in Iran to be even more merciless in repressing democratic protests than they've been so far. The consequences of this cannot be predicted in advance and are enormous, potentially limitless.
There's so many places to go with what you just said, and I think that the words of caution that you began with are extremely important because everybody wants to have an opinion, everybody jumps the gun and speaks with this absolutism. I mean, not everybody, but there's so many cases of this across the internet, and there are. We need a little bit, I think, a little bit more humility to step back at these high intensity moments and just simply take in information, allow for various hypotheses to present themselves, weigh them, and wait a little bit before moving forward with strong judgments on things. One thing that I did notice, as you pointed out, Trump has been extremely candid in his language. That's one thing for anybody who hates Trump, you got to admit, he's candid. He doesn't hide behind the Tony Blair type of language that, we're going to do responsibility to protect, to, overthrow sovereign borders in order to bomb countries, to protect them and save them from, authoritarianism and bring in liberty. He doesn't use that language. He says things like this.
Moving forward for Venezuela, what do you think is next for the Venezuelan people now that you have removed Maduro so that he can face American justice?
Well, we're making that decision now. We can't take a chance on letting somebody else run and just take over where he left or left off. So we're making that decision now. We'll be involved in it very much. And we want to do liberty for the people. We want to, have a great relationship. I think the people of Venezuela are very, very happy because they love the United States. They were run by essentially a dictatorship or worse. It couldn't have been worse. It was a terrible thing that was taking place in Venezuela. But look, tremendous numbers of people were being killed through drugs. And what they did to our country in sending prisoners and people from mental institutions and drug lords and everything, they sent them by the hundreds of thousands of people into our country. And that is just unforgivable.
Okay, that was actually the wrong clip. I thought it was the clip that he says he's going to run Venezuela. The U.S. will run Venezuela and control the oil and bring in the oil cartels to reclaim their lost possessions. I thought that was the clip. However, that being said, what he says in that clip that I just showed is also actually this is a little bit more disgusting as far as acting like we were going to bring in liberty. But what do you think about that? Like this claim that Venezuela or that Maduro has played a direct role in narco trafficking, as has been the claim. Do you think that there was anything to that, or is that completely made up as far as the claims that Trump is saying? And also, what is Maduro facing in court exactly? Like, he's being sent to New York. What are the charges being presented against him? Do they have anything on him as far as even like the claims of drug running?
I will yield to Arnaud on this because he's the legal expert. I am not.
And you noticed that Arnaud, on that note, you noticed that Arnaud just entered the studio, right? Hey, Arnaud.
Absolutely. Should we pass the baton?
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Arnaud. Yeah, we've obviously been talking about the topic that's on everybody's mind. I just played a little quick clip of Trump giving his commentary about the greatness, how great it was, and how happy the Venezuelans are that Maduro is now gone and is going to face American justice, and how he's been also the culprit of behind so much drug trafficking, sending crazy people into the U.S. and what have you, and how things are going to change. So I was just asking Marty to give his 2 cents on, but I think he's passing it on to you. When I was asking, well, is there anything to that? Is there ever any actual evidence of like what Maduro did in regards to drug trafficking, whether fentanyl or cocaine or whatever, into the U.S.? And also, what is he being charged with? What exactly is he being charged with in a New York court? Do you even know?
Well, I'll be frank. I downloaded the indictment from the Ministry of Justice website. But I haven't really looked to it yet. I do know that there are charges bearing on gun possessions.
Yeah. But
I also know that Thomas Massie himself said there's no mention in the entire indictment bearing on fentanyl. So it's somewhat strange that if there are drug charges involved, fentanyl would not be mentioned even once in the indictment sheet. So yeah. I'll leave it at that for now. We'll see. I will have to get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
On that note, yeah, like I remember actually watching a clip from 60 Minutes from 1993 that was pretty good. It was actually a specific clip that people can watch on YouTube that was going through the CIA's management of drug flows from Venezuela into the United States. And this was on primetime national television back in the 90s. You'll never hear anything like that. And it's not like that was ever dealt with even once. But that being said, now that this has happened, there's a lot of discussion about who's going to be brought in to replace Maduro. There's discussions of Maria Machado. She obviously has been set up to be the new Guaido. But at the same time, Trump has said things like this as well recently.
Of the location of opposition leader Machado, and have you been in contact with her?
No, we haven't. No, we haven't.
Mr. President,
do you have any hesitations about Machado?
Mr. President, on Monday.
I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect to be the leader.
So that's a bit odd. Now I'm getting contradictory feelings about this because on the one hand, we have this intense, like Noriega-esque exfiltration, this illegal act, where clearly there's an imperial maneuver right now to gain control economically of Venezuela as well as geostrategically. That seems to be clearly the case. But the darling, the Guaido-esque type personality is it seems has not been tapped on the shoulder. And instead, Trump has given an endorsement to the Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who seems to be, when I've heard her speeches at least so far, pretty anti-imperial and has called on the Venezuelans to resist Anglo-Zionist imperialism. So what's your take, guys, on Delcy Rodriguez and this whole thinking behind Trump and whoever the hell is making decisions right now on this topic? Let's start with Arnaud first, because I know you didn't speak too much yet.
Well, as you are alluding to, and in true Trump fashion, he says one thing and it's the exact opposite in the same sentence. But suffice it to say, it looks as if Machado is, for the time being, not being considered as a viable option. As far as Delcy Rodriguez is concerned, if you look at her family history, I think her parents were assassinated back in 1976 by the Comprador class there. So she's someone who's been a Chavista from day one. I mean, one of the most faithful, ideologically aligned character within Hugo Chavez, first circle. She gravitated. She climbed the steps of the Bolivarian Republic apparatus steadily for the last 25 years. She's very shrewd. She's very bent on living up to the legacy of her own family, I guess, and to the extent. The United States, Washington, might have thought that the extraordinary rendition of Nicolas Maduro would be the end-all of this sequence. I think they're in for a surprise. She gave a press conference. She was surrounded by the old guard, including Diosdado Cabello, who is currently serving as the interior minister. I call him the Venezuelan version of Nicolas Patrushev. So she's got their backing. She's got Padrino's backing, and I think she'll go down in flame before she succumbs to any kind of shady arrangement. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, I'd like to just play for those who have not heard her in action yet, because I didn't even know who she was before this happened. And then this is the way it goes. You don't really know where the Donetsk is, and then all of a sudden something geopolitically disastrous happens. Then you have to learn everything you can about the Donetsk. Same thing about this personality. So here's a 13-second clip here of a recent statement that she made, calling out the Zionist backing of the attack on Venezuela.
From China, Russia, Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, the governments of the world are simply shocked at the victims and targets of an attack of this nature, which undoubtedly has a Zionist slant. It's really shameful.
So you have that. She does seem to have some punch and some consistency, but at the same measure, as we were talking before you arrived, Arnaud, it seemed like in order for the exfiltration of Maduro to have happened and for no defense systems to be activated, means that there was very influential people within the Venezuelan military that must have colluded with the invaders, as we had seen in other cases, Syria more recently, implying that, does she have anything to work with? Does she have a trustworthy military in Venezuela to even carry out any type of serious defense if there was a more serious attack and control an invasion from abroad? Does that even exist, or is Venezuela's military much more compromised than we would have liked to have believed?
The question's for me.
I was throwing it at you, but Marty, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well, obviously.
Sure. Which one of us do you want first?
You first, Marty. Yeah. Let's go with you.
Okay.
Okay.
I think you've answered your own question, Matt. There's the old dialectical tradition. If you ask the right question, whatever the answer is, the answer will be revealing. The key is asking the right question. You ask the right question. And it's very clear that the military leadership is compromised. It's very clear that the military has been carefully decapitated in advance in its command leadership. The country has been decapitated. I very much agree with Arnaud's assessment. Arnaud obviously is an expert on this. I am not. But I think Arnaud is I agree for what it is worth totally, that the vice president is strong, principled. Trump may imagine that he is bending her to his will. I do not believe he will be able to do so. But I think there's another factor here. And here, there are parallels from Iraq 22 years ago. But there are also parallels 480 years ago in the Netherlands. And that is this. You can send in your army to put down the outrageous terrorists, the people you claim are terrorists. You can decapitate the old leadership, just as Philip II of Spain did when he sent in the Duke of Parma to put down those wicked Protestant terrorists in the Spanish Netherlands at the time. And it worked. And they killed a lot of people doing it. And Parma said, I have conquered what is modern Belgium, the lower half of what is modern the Netherlands as well as Belgium for you, Your Highness. Well, it didn't work. A new leadership emerged from the people. And we decapitated Saddam Hussein by hunting him down in 2003. Did that bring peace and security in Iraq? Of course it did not. I think there is a lot of opposition to President Maduro. I think in a democratic election, he might well have lost in a free and open vote. But of course, here in the United States, as you know all too well, Arnaud, we are not strangers to elections that do not reflect the democratically expressed will of the people. It's not just in Venezuela. But what are we going to be seeing? We are going to be seeing a lot of people who previously were pro-American or thought they were pro-American, deciding they are not pro-American anymore, when being pro-American means that your society breaks down, that your president is scooped off in defiance of international law. One of the reasons there has been vagueness, I think, and I'm no legal expert, you are, of course, Arnaud, but I mean, we are doing here, even on a more shameless scale than what President George Herbert Walker Bush did in Panama all those years ago. We are making it up as we go along. And also, what did we find at the UN when Bush and his people shamefully pushed through first their own administration and then through the UN accusations about the development of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which were totally fictional. Even if the Department of Justice's legal case against President Maduro superficially seems convincing, how can we trust it when we know as a matter of recorded history that previous American administrations have simply made up outrageous lies on the fly whenever they went along? And we have, again, we are obviously ignoring any precedent to international law. I really thank God you're still here, Arnaud. Thank God. Because we lost earlier this year a very dear friend of mine, an extraordinary man. And we would have needed him now more than ever. And he was American. I'm sure you're well familiar with him, Professor Francis Boyle. Professor, exactly. I spoke with Francis on the phone for an hour a week before he died suddenly. And although he had his share of health problems, he was in his mid-70s, he was vigorous, dynamic, brilliant, witty, and as alert as ever. No hint of any health problems. And then suddenly, woof, he was gone. And the indictment he was pushing to impeach Joe Biden, the former president of the United States, on grounds of treason, breaking of the Constitution, genocide, and much else, vanished with his death. He was the prime mover, and once he was removed, Biden, that wicked little invisible man, is allowed to continue existing afterwards. So when we have legal actions taken supposedly with the full panoply of the Department of Justice and the Chief Executive Office of the United States of America, how can we believe them? Because the track record is so glaring and obvious. First point. Second and final point, and that is, and I noticed you very much nodding your head on this vigorously, Arnaud, when I mentioned it before, and that is, we are doing in Venezuela now precisely what we have already done in Russia. We took a population which in general had the warmest sentiments towards America in general, and the idealized America of democracy, fair play, free speech, decency, which is what America likes to think it stands for, and most people in America want it to stand for. And instead, what is going to be the result? It is going to be the same result the Duke of Parma created in modern Belgium, which was then the Spanish Netherlands in the 1560s, with his massacres and his criminally incompetent occupation. 80 years of hatred, 80 years of war that did not destroy the Netherlands. Instead, the Netherlands became a new world power. It destroyed the world power of Spain instead. Now we're in a modern world where reactions come a lot faster and on a much larger scale. I don't think it's going to take 80 years for this to work its way through. 8 years at the most, maybe 8 months, maybe less. We are going to see major reactions very fast. Very, very fast. I'll be very interested to see if there are popular celebrations of the fall of Maduro, which I do not think there will be, though we will be told there will be. They will try and whip them up, and they will be obvious fakes. That's my prediction. I may be wrong, but that's my prediction on that. What I think we will see is what we saw in Iraq in 2003 to 2005, the beginnings of a massive popular insurrection against U.S. military occupation on a massive scale, which will spill over and destabilize other major nations across Latin America. Not just Colombia next door, but as far north as Mexico, with impacts in Brazil and Argentina and other nations as well.
Well, already you have Colombia, which is increasing. They're putting their guard up. I think they're sending in certain security forces into Venezuela because they anticipate a massive influx of people moving out of Venezuela and into Colombia. Colombia is also, I mean, I think it's likely also on the chopping block as well.
Yes.
I think they're expecting a much higher than usual likelihood of something similar being done in that country. I don't know. What do you think of that? Of a broader escalation of similar types of maneuvers being done around other Latin American countries, Panama, which has a lot of investment with China, Colombia. I don't know any other countries. I think everybody is a little bit concerned because they've all been subjected to Banana Republic maneuvers from the CIA for many decades. What are your thoughts or fears about that?
Well, I would bounce back on what Martin's said about the prospect for a perfect scenario in Venezuela.
Yes.
From the Trump administration, in as far as let's step back a few weeks when he started assembling this armada off the coast. Obviously, politically, it would have become unbearable for him to not do something. So now that he did something, he's only halfway pregnant, which you can't be. So bearing on that, the question is, since it is not possible at this point for Washington to stand pat and allow somehow their interest to be pursued by some kind of proxies, as the situation currently stands, wasn't the Trump administration's calculus that of creating actually a full war, a state of war, which would, and I agree with Martin, could very well turn into a bloody disaster for the United States. Venezuela is not like Panama. It's a huge country. It's been 25 years ideologically conditioned behind something which might not be perfect, but which provided them with a sense of dignity and self-awareness. And that Maduro, whether you like it or not, was democratically elected.
Yes.
And to that extent, they are feeling miffed right now. They are feeling humiliated. And they're going to basically make sure that, they go down fighting if the situation does escalate. Now, as far as the neighborhood is concerned, obviously, you mentioned Colombia. Gustavo Petro has already come out and made a couple of speeches, which are really clear as to his condemnation of what happened down south. He's making sure that his country is preserved from an outflow of refugees. But, I think his head is on the chopping block. I think they're not going to stop there. I think we might be focusing, if anything, too much on Venezuela when I believe they could be going after Petro, they could be going after Noriega, they could be going after Cuba. We know Marco Rubio has a long-standing feud with the Cubans.
Agreed.
And the operation in Venezuela aims to deprive them of much-needed natural resources to keep functioning. That's still possible after 60 years plus of embargo. And I would even say that Claudia Sheinbaum might be herself on the shopping block, unless she agrees to some kind of ad hoc protocol compact bearing on inviting the federal agencies, U.S. federal agencies, to jointly participate in a crackdown on Mexican drug cartels, who do exist, as a matter of fact, as opposed to the Venezuelan ones. And we could have like essentially a series of destabilization flashpoint from south of the border all the way down to Venezuela. Yes, but isn't that what the U.S. actually thrives on? This constant managing of chaos. This is actually something that they really have integrated in their managing of entire regions. Martin mentioned the situation 22 years ago in Iraq with all the spillover effects that this created. And we're 22 years later, 6 years after the Iraqi parliament adopted a resolution calling on the U.S. troops to leave, and they're still there.
Yes.
So this actually is par for the course with the Israeli Oded Yinon plan, the Greater Middle East Initiative in its different iteration later on, but adapted to South America.
Mm-hmm. And there's a comment that I just popped up here from Red Axis saying that the blockade on Venezuela is already preventing much needed oil to reach Cuba, which, I mean, Lindsey Graham also called, he just championed saying that we should replicate the success of Venezuela on Cuba now. He's coming out. He's not alone. We know that Marco Rubio has been frothing at the mouth for this type of maneuver for I think he's devoted his entire life to that.
Exactly.
So this does represent, and I think what concerns me is that a lot of the MAGA movement that emerged because of a disgust of U.S. neocon imperialism and foreign forever wars. That's the reason why MAGA was able to be organized, was conservative-minded people disgusted by this radical liberal imperialism, neoconservatism, and all of a sudden, the narrative that's selling these types of imperial engagements are using a different kind of language, and it's turning a lot of anti-imperial conservatives into champions of imperialism. We have to go in and save the Christians from the big bad Nigerian government. We have to save the white people from the genocide of the South African government. We have to go save the democracy-loving, freedom-loving Taiwanese from the big bad authoritarian Chi-Coms. And all of a sudden, it's a new type of virtue signaling that's now justifying what could be very easily, as we could see it, the same old under a slightly different flavor, which is actually tastes a lot like the 19th century flavor of British imperial, just might makes right, old school imperialism. So it's really concerning. Marty, do you have any thoughts about the hypnotic induction, the shifting of the mindset of the anti-imperial MAGA crowds and conservatives more generally into supporting a new age of crusades and wars?
Indeed, I do, Matt. My own guardian angel explained this 80 years ago. We are at war with East Asia. We have always been at war with East Asia. East Asia is our friend. East Asia has always been our friend. No, we are at war with East Asia again. This is George Orwell explaining it. 1984. Orwell was explaining two things. One is well remembered. The other should be associated with them, which he had in mind too. The first was the Nazi-Soviet Pact. The two most vicious, mass-killing, totalitarian regimes in human history, at least since Genghis Khan, he would have envied them, Hitler and Stalin, became eternal friends in 1939. And then 2 years later, they went at war with each other with genocidal ferocity in the most terrible and savage war in human history, at least so far. But then in 1945, the liberal, democratic, virtuous populations of Britain and America, who had rightly loathed the Nazis and the Japanese imperialists through World War II, were conditioned in seconds virtually to loathe Russia instead. And all the ex-Nazis, which I know you, Matt, and your amazing wife, Cynthia Chung, have documented more thoroughly than anyone else, all the worst surviving elements of the SS, the Gestapo, the Nazi security and intelligence services, were picked up and funded beyond their dreams by the United States of America against the Russians. And today, who do we support in Ukraine? We do not support the Ukrainian people or any democratically expressed will of the Ukrainian people. We support new neo-Nazis organized by the CIA, and the Jewish neocons in Washington embrace them too. For these people, power is the only thing that counts, but also there's an element that both you and Arnaud, I think, have touched on, and it's crucial too. The need for these psychopaths to feel morally fulfilled, that they are doing the Lord's will, that they are empowered. And I saw this, I was raised in the closing days of the British Empire. And as a kid, I happily swallowed this bilious nonsense without thinking about it. The British Empire was always virtuous. If you read the novels of Frederick Forsyth, of course, it still is, right? So the raping and despoiling of the entire world across the 19th century on a scale that even Hitler wanted to do, but was never able to achieve, including all of Latin America, was carried out primarily directed from the city of London and to the benefits of the British and French and Belgian imperialists at that time. But it was always accompanied by the rhetoric of self-righteousness and morality. And it struck me recently, there's a mathematical relationship we need to establish more firmly, which is the more leaderships talk, as Trump is talking now, and as the liberal imperialists and neocons have talked for so long, the more they talk in elevated spiritual, moral terms about what they are doing to rape Ukraine and Syria and Libya and now Venezuela and Mexico throughout history, and what they want to do in Cuba and Colombia and so many other countries too, and South Africa. The more moral and uplifting and spiritual and idealistic they sound, the more there will be genocides and mass graves and torture chambers.
Yep.
It's a mathematical relationship based in hypocrisy. It's an I equals small I, 1 over small I squared relationship. It's an inverse square relationship.
Yeah, on that note, like up until recently, I've been sort of sympathetic to the notion of a new Yalta in the face of the danger of thermonuclear war breaking out and hegemony, you know, this idea of a unipolar hegemonism running the world forever with an end of history doctrine. So it's hard to think through what type of sustainable solutions are available to that type of problem of thinking, which has so much power, including nuclear weapons and other things behind it. So the idea of a new Yalta is something I've been sympathetic to, but at the same measure, the more I see how it's unfolding, especially with the possibility that backdoor deals have possibly been made. I mean, the proximity between the Chinese high-level trade delegation coming in hours before this invasion and then meeting with Maduro, and then remaining there, not leaving right away. I know that there's official messaging from the Chinese government that they disapprove of this, but still, it seems like an agreement was reached to allow for the continuation of Venezuelan oil to go to China. Possibility as well of negotiations on possibly resolving the Ukraine issue, at least on the U.S. side, and maybe wiping their hands of that, maybe allowing for Taiwan to be recaptured by China. Maybe these discussions, people have said that these discussions have been happening behind the scenes. I'm open to the possibility that a carving out, a reconfiguration of the world around sort of spheres of influence, not necessarily friendly, but something more reflective of what Orwell was talking about back in the 30s or 40s. I don't necessarily know if that's a good idea anymore, especially when I'm looking at things like this. You guys have both seen this, I'm sure, of the Technate of the America that Elon Musk's grandfather was so devoted to advancing with Technocracy Incorporated, which he ran as he was the head of the Canadian Technocracy Incorporated, right? That was their mandate, to get rid of the old political class, the old, inefficient economic architectures of the past, and create a society of specialists and engineers to manage the levers of entropy in the new world system of global technates, of which they called for several technates, one for Eurasia, one for Asia, one for the Americas. Which involves, clearly, if you look at the designs here, the jurisdiction clearly involves Venezuela, a lot of Colombia, Greenland, Mexico. So I'm just thinking that may not be such a good idea when you look at the type of sick ideas of those managing what looks to be a readoption of this thing. So do you think that there is... to what degree do you agree or disagree with my assessment here? Or do you think, Arnaud, that this is perhaps not so calculating as I'm postulating here? Maybe it's a little bit more haphazard, or being driven by, people say Trump's decision making on foreign policy is shaped by the last person he speaks to. That's what I know many of our friends have made that point, and maybe that's true too. So I don't know. What do you think? Is this about like the oil, or about just chaos, or is there something a little bit more calculating?
I think there's something a lot more calculating, and
Yes.
we should always read the white papers produced by think tanks in the US. They are the one who remain when the presidents come and go. And if you look at the latest military doctrine of the United States, released in December or September of last year, the first impression is that it is indeed a kind of corrective move to regionalize or regroup within the Western Hemisphere American power. But if you read between the line, you realize that the main competitor, the main rival, the ultimate game is China. And so in that sense, what we may be starting to witness now in earnest, since they're late on the program, is but a stepping stone to eventually confront China. The game is still on. I mean, we have the restrainer within, this is how they call them, the restrainer within the U.S. military establishment, movement embodied by people like J.D. Vance, who basically are saying enough forever wars in West Asia. We need to, we should have done it yesterday already, focused on East Asia. We've lost enough time. If we don't benefit avail ourselves of the increasingly shrinking window to confront China, we'll be left in the dust. And so this is why we're seeing, those kind of extension of NATO in East Asia, involving client states like the Philippines, Japan, of course, with the new leader now who's calling for nuclear weapons in Japan, on Japanese soil. But also other countries like South Korea, the usual suspect there. And of course, Australia, we can imagine, will be part of this construct, the famous Quad arrangement. Mm-hmm. So this is not just like to decorate the room. I think they intend to use it down the road. But for now, they need to extirpate themselves out of this Ukrainian neocolonial project, which has been a disaster. Unless you're Victoria Nuland and the likes and Anne Rosenbaum. But in the more reactionary, the new reactionary, what they call the Black Enlightenment, the people behind this ideology, like J.D. Vance, like Peter Thiel, like Curtis Yarvin, they want to pivot. And remember, the pivoting was supposed to have happened in 2009 when Obama was sworn in. Right. And they got completely derailed. So let's make no mistake about it. Martin alluded to it very vividly when he mentioned the rhetoric that goes with those kind of foreign policy ventures. I always recall the second Bush Jr. Inaugurating speech, the fire of liberty in the sky. It was written by David Frum, I think, wrote that. And we saw what happened thereafter. But, and I agree with the inverse paradigm. It's inversely proportionate to the good intentions that are trotted forward. And that's just what America has always been all about. Remember, the Mayflower, the shining city on the hill, the civilizing mission, the terra nullum doctrine, all this is perfectly coherent. And it's just one slight problem as far as Washington is concerned is they still think they have the means of their ambitions 22 years after Iraq, which was a watershed moment. And the world has drastically changed ever since. We live now, whether they accept it or not, in a multipolar world. So sure, the multipolarity notion is somewhat still in its consolidating stage. But it is here, it is real. And, this notion that it will somehow the world will bow to American diktats, to me seems completely outdated and fraught with danger, as it were, because we have a complete disconnect between the establishment, the policy-making establishment in DC, and the reality of the world as it is today. That's what's dangerous to me, this kind of disconnect.
Yeah, agreed. I think that this is what bothers me as well, is that there's a nuance that people often lack. We have a tendency as humans to jump to these overly simplistic definitions and meanings, when reality is often much more colored and much more nuanced. And when the word multipolarity comes up, they often think, oh, it's either all this one thing or this other thing. However, and I've been saying this again and again, when a Marco Rubio says we have to accept a multipolar world is here, versus when a Xi Jinping or Putin says the same word, it doesn't mean the same thing. Because in the one hand, you have this Orwellian type of imperial configuration, which is not really multipolar in the healthy sense. It's pretty sick, because it's still ultimately based upon an intention in the long term to destroy of hegemony, of ultimately destroying those other spheres of influence, but in a slightly multi-generational term, versus doing it right away. Whereas the healthier version of it, which I think even emerged in the better times in the U.S., which most Americans have been so carved away from. They've forgotten that there once was a time when John F. Kennedy also spoke in this type of language, which recognized that we have to respect the diverse cultures and civilizations, but yet common aspirations to have peace, have development, to work together, and have that animate the concept of multipolarity. So it's two different competing concepts trying to fight over what will define the new system that's going to be increasingly coming in to our world. But now that the issue of Iran is concerning me too, because now we have, Benjamin Netanyahu was recently meeting with Trump just a few days ago. Coming out of that meeting, Trump gave his endorsement to supporting an attack on Iran again. Now, again, people could say it's maybe just words, but I don't think it's just words. Iran has economic agreements with Venezuela. There's already an oil tanker that was taken by the United States before it could make it to Iran, that was moving from Venezuela. And I think Trump's words. I wrote them down, saying that he said he will knock the hell out of Iran if Iran rebuilds its nuclear program. He will support any Israeli attack. It seems like Iran is in a fragile state, much more fragile, especially now after the Venezuelan operation, considering, nobody really came in. Russia, China, a lot of big words were there that Russia and China would protect or provide a sphere of protection to Venezuela. That didn't happen. Is it likely that, or do you see an increased likelihood that Iran might also be targeted for the next domino here, or do you think that they're in a better position than I'm afraid of? Marty, sorry.
First of all, again, Matt, please have me on again next time you have Arnaud on, because it is a pleasure and a privilege. But also, it's much easier for me. All I have to do is nod in agreement, because Arnaud says much more cogently what the conclusions I find myself moving to as well. I'm in full agreement with your assessment, Arnaud, 100%. And even before going directly into Iran, there's another lesson to be drawn from relatively modern history here. Again, Orwell's East Asia, Eurasia, Oceania, hellish balance. Because, of course, it wasn't a balance of peace, it was a balance of war. All three of those superpowers were able to coexist because they were in a state of war, a theoretical war with each other, which gave each government, as I know you've worked out thoroughly, Arnaud, I see it in your eyes and your face, a continued state of destabilization, chaos, and war gives them the justification and the emotional power to keep their publics destabilized and fearful and more fully under control. We see this again right now. In 1939, the Nazis and the Soviets reached their infamous pact. What was the immediate result of the pact? The elimination of Poland. Half of it went to the Soviet Union, half of it went to Nazi Germany. International law, again, was completely ignored. That the Polish state, like the Venezuelan state, was far from perfect, was contemptible and inefficient and filled with racism in so many ways. But what both the Nazis and the communists imposed upon it was infinitely worse than anything the poor innocent Poles could have conceived of. But so they were able to cooperate in destroying Poland in a mutual crime. But that didn't stop them from going to war with each other in the most savage war in human history, less than 2 years later. Now what do we see today? Something you have pointed out very significantly, Matt. I would expect to see from this, not a settlement in Taiwan, for the reason that you point out, because for Vice President Vance and for Secretary of State Rubio, China is very clearly the ultimate enemy, and probably for President Trump too. From the way he's talked about in the past, he never targeted Russia before 2016 or before 2020 in any of his election campaigns, but he always targeted China as the source of America's economic woes. It would be consistent with that. That's where he starts from. It's his Schwerpunkt. It's the main thrust of both his domestic policies, many of which I support in domestic terms, in terms of regenerating industry and rebuilding the American working and middle class. I'm all in favor of those things. But everything for Trump is seen in terms of rolling back China, ultimately. He never saw Russia as the primary threat. Secretary Rubio the same, which also explains something pleasantly surprised me, but you have to see it in a wider context. Secretary Rubio has been much more adult and serious and sustained in trying to aid the endless bloodbaths in Ukraine than his contemptible predecessors under Biden ever were. But this he's a relative dove towards Russia, and this appears to be sincere. But this has to be seen, as Arnaud, as you have so clearly put it, and as you vividly point out, Matt, in terms of seeing China as the ultimate threat. Therefore, what I think we're going to see is the quid pro quo here, if there is a quid pro quo. Russia and China stay silent about what's happening in Venezuela. In return, Trump pulls ahead with pulling U.S. support from Ukraine. And indeed, in domestic U.S. terms, in terms of dealing with the deep state, Trump may only be able to get the leverage he needs to pull out of the Ukraine mess if he gives the deep state what it wants, or what its financial and oil industry supporters want in terms of Venezuela. This is a crucial leverage. Taiwan, we have to watch carefully. Maybe there's a deal to give Taiwan over to China. It would not surprise me. Or maybe Vance and his people will have the leverage to say, no, Taiwan is absolutely crucial to us. They've constructed the case for this, which I think is basically nonsense. Or even if you can make theoretical terms for it, America cannot sustain Taiwan indefinitely when China has overwhelming sea and air superiority in its own neighborhood. Now, we're in a reversal of the situation of the 1950s, where the US was able to have total air and sea dominance over Taiwan and over the coast of China. The opposite is the case today. And I think even the president knows this. I see the president, as Reagan did, as Nick Kissinger did, as Clinton did, all the great masters of politics know when to lie and pivot and spin immediately. But when you look back, Bismarck's a classic example. You find there's a long-term strategic Schwerpunkt, straight strategic thrust of attack or preoccupation there. And Trump has always been consistent in this area. I think he thrives on being despised by idiots. As you pointed out, Matt, the people who rush to judgment, who sit before their computer consoles, and unlike Arnaud, unlike you, hopefully unlike me, don't bother reading all the position papers, because I agree with Arnaud 100%. When you read the serious documents, the consistency is there and the future actions are very clearly there. So maybe Taiwan will be served up to China on a platter today in return for us having a free hand across North America, which would incidentally include evicting China from Saskatchewan in Canada and from Alberta in Canada. I think the very admirable people running Saskatchewan and the admirable people running Alberta need to hunker down and be more alert than ever and try and cut what deals they can with the new emerging financial oil and gas centers, which are relocating in the US to Dallas, Texas, out of New York City. This is all part of the same pattern. But for me, that's the key point. I think it's very likely, you're both right, and I agree with you. I think it's more likely than not a quid pro quo has been reached, but that doesn't mean stability for 10 or 20 or 30 years. Exactly, Arnaud. It means stability for this week, if we're lucky for a year or two, but maybe only for this week. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I brought this quote up earlier, but Marco H59 just shared a little extract from the Project 2025. Which is quite explicit, you know. I mean, and I had as well presumed that there was a battle between the Agenda 47 program versus the Project 2025, and maybe there was, but it seems like when I look at the policies being put into play, it's this Peter Thiel funded Project 2025, which seems to be governing policy a little bit more than the Agenda 47, which sounds a lot. Agenda 47 sounded a lot nicer, much more reasonable. But it explicitly says 5 countries on which the next administration should focus its attention and energy on are China, Iran, Venezuela, Russia, and North Korea. Again, it doesn't specifically say we have to destroy them, but you know, when you look at the way that we're approaching these questions, it's not looking great. But let me ask you this, Arnaud: if you just now we have Budanov being brought in as Zelensky's chief of staff, if I understood this correctly. This is a recent development. I also understood that Budanov is a little bit more, he's trained by the CIA. That's what I got by listening to the Duran, and apparently that was revealed by a New York Times article not that long ago. And he does represent, it seems, a different faction, a different ideology or different grouping than that which was represented by Yermak or Zaluzhny, possibly indicating that a different strategy that might get the U.S. out of the, or maybe might provide some form of off-ramp to the Ukraine never-ending war. That might be possible. So number one, I guess for you, I got a question. Do you think that with Budanov, there is more optimism that you have that the U.S. might be able to put an end to this or remove itself? Number two, if the U.S. is able to get out of it by some I can't even imagine how, but if this could happen and some agreement could be reached with Russia that's workable, would Europe double down on driving for a broader war with Russia still, without the U.S. support providing that momentum? So what's your take on that twofold question?
Well, I'll evacuate the second branch of your question as far as Europe's capabilities to conduct on their own the conflict, by saying no, they don't have the means to do so. They're broke. They are a few years away from having the industrial capacity to match that of the Russians. And by that time, the entire Ukraine question might be moot. As far as Budanov is concerned, well, we have to look at Budanov. What's his track record? Budanov he was the head of military intelligence. He was palling around with former National Security Advisor Sullivan. Al-Qaeda is with us. We're fighting next to Al-Qaeda in Syria. Sullivan, that Sullivan. Sullivan was in Kiev just merely a few days meeting with Budanov before the Crocus City Hall bombing. Budanov is wanted in Russia on account of this engineering the attempt to blow the Kerch Bridge in October 8, 2022. But somehow he seems to have the favors of the CIA, obviously, and I guess the U.S. is pressuring. So that's really the question here: is the U.S. pressuring Zelensky to elevate Budanov in such a way that Budanov might be a candidate for the upcoming presidential election? In which case he would be a suitable rival to Zaluzhny, who's the UK creature. That's something that needs to be cleared up as time goes on. We'll see. But it could also be a maneuver by Zelensky to bring him into the presidential office, so as to somewhat tar him in such a way that he neutralizes Budanov prospect to be elected. So it's the jury is still out on who did what. I would tend to say I don't believe Zelensky is that Machiavellic. So I think it's more like the U.S. side pressuring Zelensky to pick X, Y, and Z in anticipation to try to groom their own horse in the race. Budanov actually said in an interview that is still reverberating a few months after he gave it, that the longer we wait, the longer there might not be a Ukraine as we see it today. That nations are born, they have a lifespan, and then they can perfectly disappear. It's part of the cycles of international relations. So at least, the guy seems to be cognizant enough to understand that if they follow under the current trajectory, there might not be anything to negotiate over. So does that, by extension, imply that he would be a suitable person to sign any kind of agreement with the Russian side? We will have to see what the election produces, to the extent we have elections pretty soon, because we have a U.S. political agenda calendar, which is increasingly tight now, since we've witnessed immobilism the first Trump administration year, the first year. And we know that with the midterm election coming in earnest, Trump will be, and that's been announced by Susan Wild, is a cabinet head of cabinet. She's going to put him on the road to try to shore up some of the contested Senate seats and the likes. So he might not have a lot of time to dedicate to trying to find a solution. If, as polls seem to be indicating as of today, the Republican lose control of the House of Representatives and possibly the Senate, who's going to ratify any kind of agreement? I don't see a Democratic-controlled Congress ratifying any agreement signed between whoever emerged out of an election, or to the extent they delegate the temporary transitory signature to the president of the Rada, as the Constitution calls for. It's possible, but hasn't been done yet. And the Russian Federation.
Mm-hmm.
So don't forget that as far as the liberal interventionists and the neocons are concerned, the idea is to try to play for time, try to micromanage the situation first in 6 months increments. They're doing pretty good right now. I mean, they've got 1 year under their belt and nothing got done of substance. As I said, the midterm election campaign is going to be around the corner, at least in earnest by early spring, and then full force starting after summer break. So by then, all bets are off as to what will happen on November 3rd of this year. And it's game over. The Trump administration is over. I mean, the big foreign policy win that he was looking for, the one on which he was elected, putting an end to the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, will have come to nothing. And then basically we have elections, and anything is possible. I mean, J.D. Vance might be the putative GOP candidate for the general election. It does not mean that he will win out the election against whoever the Democrats put in front of him. And I think the Democrats are a lot more astute about internal politics. At least they've grown out of this kind of impotence that they displayed in the 2000s, in the first decade of the 21st century, when the GOP seemed to be running circles around them. They've learned from that. And they will have a very strong candidate to oppose J.D. Vance. So even that is not a guaranteed result. And in which case, we may remain in the Eastern European theater of operation. Just enough time for the Europeans to get their infrastructure into place, to develop those logistical hubs, to make sure they can deploy about 800,000 NATO troops to the eastern flank of NATO in earnest. That's the plan right now. This is what it's all about. They haven't given up on that. In China, for them, will come after they defeat Russia. They need to inflict strategic defeat to Russia, operate regime change there. They have already fifth columnists here as we speak today, waiting to be activated. They're just sleeping cells. And when the time comes, they hope that the house of cards will collapse to the extent there will be a generational shift. It will be difficult to replace the Solzhenitsyn class, the current class, those who saved Russia, in a snap of a finger, So they will wait. For the time being, they know they stand no chance. They may try to prod here and there. They cultivate their sales. They're trying to recruit. But they're not going to try anything measured. But, when the time comes, they will resume it. And the idea is if they can get their hands on Russia, then they will be perfectly equipped to take on China. So goes the logic anyway.
Very powerfully said, Arnaud. That's a stark, but I think very, very astute assessment of the orientation. And I think that should be a lesson that people should have learned over the years of convergence between the liberal imperial left and the neocon right, convergence of the same continuous policy. Now, obviously, we all hope that there's something more sane bubbling under the surface that might break that flow. But at the same measure, we could see the same patterns yet again, where an apparent division or opposition actually is nudging us, stumbling us towards a common, very, very bad slaughterhouse. So very, very important to stay above the left-right discourse, I think, which is often fed to us to keep us in an emotional state, sucked in the drama of it all and losing sight of the big picture, which is so important to hold on to. So on that note, we've passed the top of the hour. Marty, I think that Arnaud just delivered some wonderful final remarks. Do you have any final thoughts as well to throw out to the audience before we close off for today's episode?
Yes, I do. And I think I agree again, everything Arnaud said, a wonderful assessment, profound assessment. And I want to focus on one point you made, Arnaud, not to disagree, on the contrary. I just want to underline it in flaming neon lights. And it is this, that Susan Wiley is planning to send the president on the road again this year to do what he does best, to shore up candidates for the Senate and the House. This is an admission of the failure of the Trump administration policies. MAGA is disintegrating. It has run out of steam. As you pointed out so vividly and authoritatively, it has not delivered this year. Inflation is rising again. I think the president is doing some things that will, if they are allowed to, materially improve the condition of the working class in America over several years, but it will not kick in soon enough to compensate for the pain in the meantime. Exactly. And there is going to be an enormous backlash of rage against the wars in South America and other places, because Venezuela is only the start. It is starting a fire and a conflagration which will burn out of control, which they do not expect and do not anticipate. But the key point, therefore, is watch the 2026 elections, because Trump for 10 years has ridden the wave of rage and frustration and demand for constructive change in America, and it is leaving him. There is a new alternative which has emerged. It has emerged with AOC, Alessandra Ortiz-Cortez, who, however much you disagree with her, is the most powerful and effective fundraiser for the entire Democratic Party in every campaign she appears in across the entire United States. And that gives her new clout. And now we have Mr. Mamdani taking over in New York. We have similar, genuine, radical reforming city administrations in Minneapolis and in Seattle. The key thing to watch is, will enough of these new people, this new age people, not new age in the 1960s terms, but the new age of the mid-2020s term, emerge, and I believe they will, from the grassroots, to take the Democratic nominations, to transform the Democratic Party and take control of the House and the Senate in 2026. And the one point I add to this is the great pattern of American history for at least 120 years is, if you want to know how a presidential election goes, look how the congressional midterms go immediately before it. Whenever there is a huge sweep in the midterms, then that party, the outside party, is in an ideal position to criticize the incumbents for all their failures in the next 2 years, and they sweep to victory. It happened for the Republicans from 1918 to 1920. It happened for the Democrats from 1930 to 1932. It happened for the Republicans in 1950 till 1952. It happened for the Democrats again in 1958 to John Kennedy's victory in 1960. It happened in the rejection of Lyndon Johnson in the midterms of 1966, 2 years before he was forced to step down. It happened before the emergence from 74 to 76, before Jimmy Carter fizzled miserably, but he was given his chance. It happened in 78 to 1980. It's how Bill Clinton got in. It is how the Republicans got in, even with George W. Bush in 2000. And President Trump has written it. It will run against President Trump, I predict, in the midterms of this year. And then we will see a President Ortiz-Cortez, or someone equivalent to her, or a constitutional amendment, which is supposed to be unprecedented, but always happens in times of crisis, to allow Mr. Mamdani to run as president of the United States, if his initial track record is impressive and popular in New York and gains traction across the country. This can happen incredibly fast. Nobody in the middle of 1932 thought that prohibition could be repealed by another constitutional amendment, and yet within 9 months it was so repealed. These things can happen incredibly fast in America, but only in times of crisis. So watch the 2026 election. Whether then the new wave of reform will be co-opted and neutralized or derailed, as MAGA reform was, we'll have to see. That's another battle to look for. But reform is leaving MAGA, and the drive for change will now be entirely on the extreme left of the Democratic Party.
All right, that's Marty C's forecast. So, guys, thank you for helping to provide the bigger picture analysis of things. That's what the show is all about, and what I hope I hope that people are more equipped now than they were an hour ago, going into 2026 with more weapons, more intellectual weapons in their armory, their metaphysical armory. And I appreciate this conversation so very much. So thank you both. And thank you everybody for joining us in this week's Pluralia Dialogos. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much, Arnaud.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. And again, wish you a happy new year.
You too, exactly.
All right. God bless us, everyone.
Amen.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.